Hi, I'm your host Dave Kemp, and this is Future Ear Radio. Each episode, we're breaking down one new thing, one cool new finding that's happening in the world of hearables, the world of voice technology. How are these worlds starting to intersect? How are these worlds starting to collide? What cool things are going to come from this intersection of technology? Without further ado, let's get on with the show. All right, so we're joined here today by Andy Bellavia. This is going to be part one of a two-part hearables discussion. So Andy, tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do.
Thanks a lot, Dave. I appreciate being on your podcast. I'm Andy Bellavia. I'm responsible for marketing and business development for Knowles Corp's Hearing Health Technology Division, which encompasses both hearing aids, hearables, radio communications, and the like. And I focus on hearables, music, earphones, and radio communications. And obviously, hearables has been an area that's garnered a lot of attention and is growing quite rapidly now.
Yeah, no, it really is. It's funny. It's like Andy and I have been in tweeting about hearables. That's how we met each other for years now, both sort of operating in and around the hearing healthcare space, largely around hearing aids for me. And, that's one part of what Andy deals with too, with, being a component supplier. And, it's fascinating because even going back to when we were at the Voice Summit in July, obviously we've been privy to, AirPods era and the emergence of AirPods, going back to 2017 or 2016 when they came out. But it's like flash forward to October, November this year when it was, just this flurry of announcements. And I guess that's a good starting point here. It's like we have this emergence of Amazon's Echo Buds, you have AirPods, and then now AirPods Pro. Along with that too, you should mention the new Beats, the wireless Beats ones. Those are a really interesting form factor as well. You have Google's Pixel Buds version 2, which are going to be coming out early 2020, Amazon's Echo Buds, which are out now, and then also eventually we might get Microsoft Surface Buds. So, here we are on the doorstep of this next decade. And it's like one of the very new things within computing is this idea that everybody's sort of walking around with a mini ear computer, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. It's never been a more interesting time in the hearable space because the technology has finally matured where we could actually have compelling devices that people want to have in their ears. The earlier product, and a lot of credit goes to Bragi and Doppler, amongst others, for tackling the hearable space when none of the technology was really ready. Mm-hmm. And so, in the end, they had problems with battery life, with robustness of connectivity, and so on. But they really pioneered the design thinking towards ear computers. Now, Nuheara is interesting because they're very early, but they focus on a specific use case that they know they could succeed in. And they've kind of straddled that gap. But ultimately, it took the custom chip made by Apple for the original AirPods that really brought all the pieces together, that seamlessly paired up, that had very good robustness of connectivity and gave 5 hours battery life, which is now enough that you can start thinking about using them in longer wear situations.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, to your, kind of to what you're saying, it's like you had companies like Bragi and Doppler that they had the right idea, but, as startups, they didn't, I don't think they had the like the capital and the resources to get through that period that really Apple was able to succeed through before the miniaturization had become sort of feasible. I think they kind of just powered through it, especially for that, those first few years of AirPods. And but it's kind of fascinating because, this takes me back to something that I cite a lot when I'm writing is this, it's basically this framework that Chris Anderson, who's the CEO of 3D Robotics laid out, which he defined as the peace dividends of the smartphone wars. And really what he was describing was that, with the introduction of the iPhone in 2006 and then Android following not long after, you had this giant global smartphone war, with these two companies as the OS providers and then all the different handset manufacturers. And because of this, it created this massive supply chain of not only the phones, but also all the components housed within the phones. So the GPS, the processors, the radio antennas, the batteries, all these things. And, it's like here we are today. And I think we're really seeing those peace dividends be, distributed far and wide. Like you can make anything from a drone to a mini robot to, a hearable device. And you can house a lot of that really sophisticated technology in a small device because the time, enough time has progressed to where Moore's law is taken into effect and these things have just gotten smaller and smaller. And so I think that's why it took a company like Apple to really sort of pioneer some of this stuff, because Apple is so good at making really small devices, as evidenced by like their Apple Watch. And so they have a lot of knowledge and wherewithal in that. And so I think it's no surprise that they sort of ushered in this new era where you now have all of Apple's competitors starting to follow suit. And I think that there's a lot more to why the ear makes such a highly sought after place for a number of different reasons. And as we get into this conversation, we're going to have a part 2 where we're talking specifically about just sort of like the use cases that come from all of this. But I'll kick it back over to you. I mean, how does this, in your eyes, now that we have this ubiquity that's starting to become a thing with these in-the-ear devices, without going too much into the actual use cases, in your eyes, how does this change the whole dynamic of computing with the idea that everybody sort of now wears a in-the-ear computer?
Yeah, I like the analogy of the smartphone wars, because for this to become a viable category, devices had to be developed for it. First, there was Apple developing their own proprietary chip, but once the category for true wireless music players, not necessarily even intelligent hearables, but just true wireless music players became established, then some of the market DSP providers started developing along those lines. And so now you have people like Qualcomm, for example, who develop chipsets specifically for this case, as well as microphones and speakers and all the rest. And so now the hardware has come together. And at the same time, what features are needed to make compelling true wireless hearable devices are also coming together. I think of Earn, for example. They were right there with Bragi. Actually, I think theirs came out a little bit before Bragi, and they took exactly the opposite approach to Earn. We wanted to make it very simple and perform well, so simple that they didn't even have microphones, which you literally had to pull one out of your ear to have a phone call. So there was a lot of kind of feeling it through. And I think, in the end, beginning with AirPods, everybody now could more or less assemble a device that people would want to wear. And so now you see lots of true wireless devices. And when you think about the use cases, music and podcasts are still the primary use cases. But thinking forward, now we get into true intelligence. Now that the hardware has finally arrived, that I can produce reliable devices with long enough battery life, and I can listen to music or stream podcasts, where does it go beyond that, right? Think about the rise of transparency. Normally, you put a set of earphones in and you're isolating yourself from the world. And now increasingly, you can mix in streaming and reality. It's something I've gotten quite used to with my connected hearing aids. Because I can stream a podcast or listen to music and dial in any level of reality versus streaming I want. And I almost forget what it's like not having that. For example, I was on the train coming back from Chicago when there were a couple of loud passengers. Well, I just put the slider a little more over towards streaming, right? And I could still hear what was going on about the train, but, I was more focused on the streaming. But then when I needed to talk to the conductor, all I had to do, a couple of taps on the ear, it went more towards reality and I could have a conversation. So these are the sorts of things that are coming together to make a really good experience wearing devices out and about.
Yeah, no, you make such a good point there, with transparency mode, because it's like, I think one of the most interesting things about Apple is they're not necessarily bringing forth brand new innovation. Like, for those that have been following the hearable space for a little bit, they would know that there have been offerings out in the market for years, like, early Doppler, the Doppler Hero 1, Nuheara's IQ Buds. These have transparency mode on them. I'm not sure, how they compare, because I haven't used AirPods Pro yet. But I think what AirPods Pro does is it exposes people. It's exposing a lot of people to some of these really cool hearable features, just like you said, that you are experiencing with your hearing aids, which is like a whole separate conversation that I think is really fascinating that we need to have, which is this idea of why hearing aids are such an interesting form factor. But this idea of being able to live in a world where you're wearing AirPods for 5-6 hours a day, but you're wearing them in a variety of settings. So I think one of the most interesting things with the AirPods Pro is this force sensor that's on the stem of the device, that you just kind of press it for a little bit, and it will toggle you in between active noise cancellation and this transparency mode. And just to your point, it allows for you to sort of seamlessly mix your digital acoustic setting with your physical ambient acoustic setting. And I think that's really, really fascinating. And this is the type of stuff that's happening at a really, really fast rate. I mean, just here, I'll quote a Bloomberg article that is quoting the expectations that AirPods are going to double to 60 million units during 2019 due to a much higher than expected demand for AirPods Pro. So again, I think you have two things happening at once. You have this notion that's very widely held in the market that AirPods are great. And then now with AirPods Pro, people are saying these things are even better. And the reason they're saying that is largely because of a lot of the hearables features that have been around but are becoming mainstream through offerings like AirPods Pro.
And the convergence with hearing aids, which is
Mm-hmm.
really fascinating.
Yeah.
Because you have a new Hear is a great example. They focus, precisely on hearing enhancement, for people who have trouble hearing in loud restaurants or whatnot. And now you have AirPods Pro, which is really focused on music and Siri, but at the same time has transparency mode and would be perfectly capable of doing this sort of beamforming, so it focuses on the person in front of you when you're in a crowded restaurant, this sort of enhancement. All of those features which are in hearing aids starting to show up in hearables, and vice versa. Up
Mm-hmm.
until a year ago, you didn't have a universally Bluetooth connected hearing aid, and now you do.
Yeah.
And so I think both technologies from usability point of view are starting to feed off each other. What makes an all-day comfortable wearable hearing aid? Some of those features are starting to feed into hearable devices.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's like, I guess for the gist of this conversation has been, this is, if anybody asks why now, this is why now. It's that the hardware has become feasible. And along with that, we have made it so that as a society, it is socially acceptable to wear things like AirPods for longer and longer periods of time. So we really are progressively moving to this future where you start to wonder, okay, so if people are wearing these things for 5, 6, 7, and beyond hours a day, what types of new things are they going to be able to do with a computer in your ear like that? So we'll wrap for today. I would be remiss if we did not mention the panel that Andy and I are going to be doing along with a few others at Project Voice in January, the emergence of hearables. Andy, anything you want to say about that panel?
Well, I'm really looking forward to the panel, as well as the second part of this podcast, where we really start to think about, now that the hearable hardware has arrived, now that in the social context, people are more used to wearing them all day, and people around them are used to people having things hanging out of their ears and not being put off by it. Where do we go from here? Mm-hmm. That's going to be an interesting topic on the panel, and I'm looking forward to discussing that with you in the second part of this podcast as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Andy. Thanks for joining us today. Thank you for everybody for tuning in, and we will chat with you next time. Cheers. Thanks for tuning in today. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Future Ear Radio. For more content like this, just head over to futureear.co, where you can read all the articles that I've been writing these past few years on the worlds of voice technology and hearables and how the two are beginning to intersect. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll chat with you next time.